What drives a woman to kill? We often picture murderers as monsters, people you could spot in a crowd. Their malice obvious. But what if the most dangerous predator is someone you'd never suspect? The friendly neighbor, the devoted wife, the compassionate nurse. For a long time, we've told ourselves that women, by their very nature, couldn't be serial killers. That assumption is a deadly mistake. We'll meet a respected farm owner from Indiana who turned her land into a graveyard for lonely men. A woman in Florida whose killing spree on the highways sparked a national debate about victims and vengeance. And a smiling caregiver nicknamed Jolly Jane, who used her trusted position to get terrifyingly close to her victims. In this video, we'll explore the chilling motives and secret methods of female killers. What sends them over the edge, and how do they hide in plain sight? The very idea of a female killer is unsettling because it challenges what we think we know about gender. Society tends to raise girls to be nurturing and boys to be competitive. This creates a cultural blind spot, a denial that women can be brutally aggressive, which allows their crimes to go unnoticed for shockingly long periods. Now, men commit most homicides, that's a fact. But women are far from absent in the world of lethal violence. In fact, some studies estimate that women account for up to 15% of all serial killers. But their reasons for killing, their methods, and their choice of victims are often completely different from men. Male serial killers are usually driven by sadistic fantasy or sexual violence, and they often hunt strangers. For female serial killers, the motives tend to be more practical. The most common reason is simple: money. These are the black widows of true crime, who murder husbands, lovers, or relatives for insurance policies and inheritances. Other motives include power and control, often seen with angels of death in hospitals or nursing homes, where caregivers get a twisted thrill from deciding who lives and who dies. And sometimes the motive is pure revenge, born from a lifetime of abuse that finally boils over into violence. Their methods are different too. While men often use brute force, women lean toward more secretive, low-profile ways of killing. Poison has always been a classic choice, a weapon that can look like a natural death and allows the killer to play the part of the grieving innocent. They are also much more likely to kill people in their own circle, husbands, children, or the elderly patients they care for, by exploiting the very trust that makes their crimes so unthinkable. To really understand why women kill, we have to look past the headlines and into the dark, complicated stories of their lives. We'll start with a case that defines the most common and chilling motive of all: greed. Case Study 1. The Black Widow. Belle Gunness. In the early 1900s, on a remote farm in LaPorte, Indiana, a woman named Belle Gunness was building an empire. To her neighbors, she was a tough but respectable woman, a hard-working Norwegian immigrant and widowed mother just trying to get by. But under the surface of this quiet farm life, Belle was harvesting death, becoming one of history's most ruthless and prolific serial killers. Her story is a textbook example of the Black Widow, a woman who killed again and again for one reason: cash. Born in Norway in 1859, Belle came to America in 1881, chasing the promise of wealth. She settled in Chicago and married Mads Sorensen in 1884. That's when the convenient tragedies started. Soon after they married, their home and business burned down under mysterious circumstances, and they collected the insurance money. A short time later, Mads Sorensen died of what was called heart failure, on the single day that two of his life insurance policies happened to overlap. His family was suspicious and demanded an investigation, but nothing ever came of it. It's also believed several of Belle's children died in infancy around this time, each death likely bringing another quiet insurance check. After Mads's death, Belle married Peter Gunnis in 1902 and moved to the now infamous Indiana farm. Her bad luck followed her. Less than a year later, Peter was dead. Belle's story was a bizarre one. A heavy meat grinder and a jar of brine had supposedly fallen from a high shelf, striking him on the head. A coroner's jury was called, but somehow, Belle escaped justice again and cashed in a $3,000 insurance policy. Now twice widowed and flush with cash, Belle began the most sinister part of her career. She reinvented herself as a lonely, wealthy widow, looking for a good man to share her fortune. She placed ads in Norwegian-language newspapers across the Midwest, targeting bachelors and widowers with money. Her letters were masterpieces of manipulation, painting a picture of a beautiful farm and a loving heart. But there was always one condition. Her suitor had to prove his love by selling everything he owned and bringing the cash to her farm. And she insisted he must tell no one where he was going. One by one, men answered her call. They arrived in LaPorte with their life savings, dreaming of a future with the charming widow. John Moo, Henry Gerholt, Olaf Svenherud, Andrew Helgelian. The list just kept growing, and none of them were ever seen again. As soon as they handed over their money, Belle's charm disappeared. Her methods were brutal and efficient. It's believed she often poisoned them with strychnine in their coffee. But Belle was a strong, physically imposing woman, and she wasn't afraid to use a cleaver or a hammer to finish the job. Afterwards, she'd dismember their bodies in her cellar and bury the remains in her hog pen. For years, Belle got away with it. The men disappeared from different states, and because she'd made them promise to keep their trip a secret, no one knew where to even start looking. But her greed finally tripped her up. A man named Andrew Helgelian was one of her last victims. His brother Assel got worried when Andrew vanished after saying he was going to see the widow Gunnis. Assel started writing to Belle, refusing to let the matter drop. Feeling the pressure, Belle made one last desperate move. On the night of April 28, 1908, the Gunnis farmhouse burned to the ground. Inside, authorities found what they assumed were the bodies of Belle's children and the charred, headless corpse of a woman, presumed to be Belle. A handyman named Ray Lamphere, who Belle had a rocky relationship with, was arrested for arson and murder. It seemed like a tragic, but open and shut case. But Assel Helgelian didn't buy it. He showed up in LaPorte and insisted they search the farm for his brother. What they found turned a local tragedy into a national horror story. As they dug into the soft dirt of the hog pen, they unearthed a graveyard of human remains, torsos, limbs, and heads, many stuffed into sacks. The final body count is unknown, but estimates range from 14 to as many as 40 people. The mystery only deepened. The headless corpse from the fire was much smaller than the powerful Belle Gunnis. Ray Lamphere, the handyman, swore that Belle had faked her own death. He claimed she'd murdered a transient woman to use as a body double, drugged her own children, and then set the house on fire before escaping with all the money. Belle Gunnis was never officially seen again. For years, people reported spotting her across the country, but she vanished, leaving behind a legacy of greed and butchery. She used the image of a lonely widow to lure men in, also she could butcher them for their savings. Her story is a chilling reminder that the love of money can be a motive as powerful as any other. Belle Gunnis's cold-blooded greed is one thing, but the road to murder isn't always paved with dollar signs. Sometimes it starts in a place of deep pain, twisting a long history of abuse into a campaign of violent revenge. This is where a killer's rage, after simmering for years, finally explodes. And that brings us to the most recognized female serial killer of all. A woman whose life forces us to ask tough questions about where victimhood ends and monstrosity begins. Eileen Wuornos. Case Study 2. The Damsel of Death. Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos is one of the most controversial figures in true crime history. The media called her America's first female serial killer, and her case is a tangled mess of trauma, rage, and violence. Unlike the quiet, methodical poisoners, Wuornos was loud and direct. She used a gun. She killed on the highways of Florida, and her victims were strangers. Her story forces a hard question. Was she a cold-blooded predator killing for cash, or a deeply broken woman taking revenge on a world that had brutalized her? Her life began in tragedy. Her father was a convicted child molester who killed himself in prison. Her mother abandoned her as a baby, raised by her grandparents. Her childhood was a nightmare of neglect and abuse. She said her own grandfather assaulted her, and she started trading sex for money and cigarettes as a young teen. After getting pregnant at 14 and giving the baby up for adoption, she was kicked out of her home, left to survive on her own. Sex work became her life. This kind of deep childhood trauma is a story heard time and time again in the lives of violent criminals. By the late 1980s, Wuornos was living a transient life in Florida, working as a prostitute along the state's highways. It was here, between late 1989 and late 1990, that she began her killing spree. 7 men died. The first was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old shop owner. His body was found in the woods, shot multiple times. Over the next year, 6 more men were found dead along central Florida's highways. All were middle-aged men who had picked Wuornos up, and all of them were shot to death. For police, it was a tough case. The bodies were found across different counties, with little to connect them. The breakthrough finally came when investigators started tracking items from the victims that had been sold at pawn shops. Wuornos and her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, had been using the victims' cars and pawning their belongings. Once a composite sketch hit the news, Wuornos was identified and arrested at a biker bar in January 1991. The key to the whole case was Tyria Moore. Investigators convinced her to cooperate. In a series of recorded phone calls, Moore begged Wuornos to confess, and Wuornos, saying she wanted to protect her girlfriend, admitted to the killings. At her first trial, for the murder of Richard Mallory, her defense was simple: self-defense. She testified that Mallory had raped her and threatened to kill her, and that she shot him to save her own life. She claimed that all 7 men had either attacked or tried to attack her, and that every killing was a fight for survival. The prosecution told a very different story. They painted her as a cold, calculating robber who murdered her clients to steal their cars and their money. The jury agreed with them. She was convicted and sentenced to death. In the end, she received 6 death sentences. The debate over Eileen Wuornos's real motives continues today. Was she just killing for money, like Belle Gunness? The robberies certainly point that way. Or was something else going on? Her claims of self-defense were shaky, but it was later revealed that her first victim, Richard Mallory, actually had a past conviction for attempted rape, a fact that never made it into her trial. Many experts believe her actions were the final, violent explosion of a lifetime of trauma and rage against men. From this perspective, the killings weren't just robberies, they were revenge. Every man she met on that highway became a symbol of the men who had abused her, her father, her grandfather, and a long line of violent Johns. Her violence was explosive and direct, nothing like the quiet poisonings of other female killers. She confronted her victims with a gun, a method far more common among men. Eileen Wuornos shatters the simple stereotypes. She wasn't a black widow or an angel of death. She was a raw nerve of rage, a product of a brutal life. Her story doesn't give us easy answers. It forces us to look at the blurred line between victim and predator and consider how a life of violence can create a monster who is also, in her own way, a casualty. She was executed by lethal injection in 2002, leaving behind a story that still challenges everything we think we know about why women kill. So we've seen greed, and we've seen revenge. But what if the motive is something else entirely? What if the killer doesn't use a gun or an axe? What if their weapon is trust itself, delivered silently in a place where people are supposed to heal? This brings us to another type of female killer, one whose crimes are often the hardest to spot: the medical murderer, also known as the angel of death. They don't kill for money or revenge, but for a terrifying thrill, a sense of power over life and death itself. In the late 1800s, Jane Toppin was known as one of the best nurses in Massachusetts. People called her Jolly Jane. She was cheerful, skilled, and seemed completely devoted to her patients. But behind that sunny personality was a cold-blooded monster who used her medical knowledge not to heal, but to kill. Jane Toppin was an angel of death, a caregiver who murdered the very people in her care for a deeply disturbing psychological thrill. Like many killers, her life started with tragedy. Born Honora Kelly in 1854, she was abandoned by her unstable father at a Boston orphanage after her mother died. From there, she was taken in by the Toppin family as an indentured servant. They gave her their name, but she was never treated like a real daughter. This early life of abandonment and feeling second best likely planted the seeds of resentment that would eventually bloom into murder. Despite her rough start, Jane was smart and did well in school. In 1885, she started training as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital. It was there she found both her calling and her weapon. She became obsessed with the powerful drugs used on patients, especially morphine and atropine. She started experimenting on the sick and elderly, changing their doses just to see what would happen. She found that having the power to bring a patient to the edge of death and then pull them back gave her a godlike rush. After her training, she worked as a private nurse for wealthy families, which gave her total access to vulnerable patients and their medicine cabinets. Her killing spree began. Her method was sneaky. She would mix a cocktail of morphine and atropine, two drugs that could mask each other's effects, making it hard for doctors at the time to know what had happened. She killed patients, fellow nurses, and even her landlords. But what makes Toppin so horrifying is the intimacy of her crimes. She later confessed that she got a sexual thrill from killing. Her ultimate satisfaction came from climbing into bed with her victims as the poison worked, holding them in her arms, and feeling their last breath leave their bodies. This wasn't a detached act of poisoning. It was a sick, personal ritual of power. She told investigators her ambition was to have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who ever lived. For years, nobody suspected a thing. As a nurse, death was all around her, and her victims were often old or sick, so their deaths didn't raise red flags. This is the hallmark of an angel of death. Their trusted position provides the perfect cover. She was the caring nurse at the bedside, the last person anyone would ever suspect. Her downfall was her own recklessness. In the summer of 1901, she moved in with the Davis family to care for the elderly mother. In just a few weeks, she poisoned and killed not only the old woman, but also her husband and two of their daughters. The sudden death of a whole healthy family was too suspicious to ignore. The surviving family members demanded a toxicology report on one of the daughters, which revealed lethal doses of morphine. The investigation quickly pointed to the one person who was there for all the deaths, their nurse, Jolly Jane. She was arrested in October 1901 and gave a full, chilling confession, admitting to at least 31 murders, but hinting the real number might be closer to 100. She described her crimes in horrifying detail, explaining that she killed some people out of jealousy and others because they annoyed her, but most for the simple, terrifying thrill of it. At her trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent the rest of her life in a mental hospital. Jane Toppin's case is a bone-chilling look inside the mind of a secret killer. She killed for the thrill, a motive more often associated with men, but her methods were classic for a female killer: quiet, intimate, and hidden behind a mask of care. Her story shows how the deepest trust can be turned into a weapon, turning a healer's hands into instruments of death. When you look at the stories of Belle Gunness, Eileen Wuornos, and Jane Toppin together, some disturbing patterns start to emerge. They show us that women who kill aren't all the same. Their motives are as different as they are terrifying. You have the cold, practical greed of Gunness, who treated murder like a business. You have the explosive, vengeful rage of Wuornos, born from a lifetime of abuse. And you have the chilling psychopathy of Toppin, who killed for the ultimate high of power and control. Despite their differences, these cases show us what criminologists have been saying for decades. The number one motive for female serial killers is usually money. They are far more likely than men to kill for profit. They also tend to kill people they know, people who trust them, family, partners, and patients. This is a sharp contrast to male killers, who most often target strangers. Their methods are different too. Women often choose quieter, more covert weapons. Poison has been a go-to method for centuries because it can be passed off as a natural death. And as we saw with Toppin, being a caregiver provides the perfect cover. It's a chilling fact that some studies show nearly 40% of female serial killers have worked as nurses or healthcare providers. Death is just part of the job, and they have easy access to lethal drugs. The biggest factor that helps them get away with it is our own disbelief, the cultural blind spot. The idea that women just don't do things like this is what allowed Belle Gunness to run her murder farm for years and let Jane Toppin kill dozens without anyone catching on. It gives them a cloak of invisibility. Eileen Wuornos is the exception that proves the rule. Her violence was so direct and masculine that it shocked everyone precisely because it wasn't how a woman was supposed to kill. Looking into the why and how of female murderers reveals that the capacity for violence isn't limited by gender, but the way that violence plays out often. The motives of money, revenge, and power are universal. But the methods, the quiet poison, the betrayal of trust, the exploitation of a caregiver role, are often uniquely female. These stories are a terrifying reminder that evil doesn't have one specific look. It isn't always the monster hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it's the friendly neighbor, the trusted nurse, or the heartbroken lover. It's a warning that the most dangerous threats can come from the very people we're taught to trust the most. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these cases do you find the most unsettling? For more true crime stories like this one, click the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching.